All right, Dan Ryan, council candidate, meeting us right here via vMix Zoom scenario. Nice to talk to you. First of all, thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your day to chat with us. We were talking. I was briefly before we started rolling. We were talking about the run for the primary and kind of what you've done since. What did you learn running for this primary? It had to be very bizarre. It was on the onset of all of this coronavirus stuff, and as you prepare for the main election here, what have you learned? What are you doing to get your name out there and your thoughts out there to the public?
Well, the good news is everyone seemed to adjust it just fine. So I've been on a lot of Zoom hours, if you will, with many different constituents, and we just kind of pivoted towards that. And we found that we were able to connect with so many voters, and we just kept building upon our base. The good thing about doing good work in this community, and for me, it's coming from the community independent sector, is you build a lot of relationships. And I've always tended to, build upon that. I collect people along the way and believe them. And if I don't agree with them, that's fine, but I certainly value their opinion. So I just kept building upon that. And we had enough of a ground game and enough of a base to get into the runoff with 18 candidates. And I'd say over 10 of them working really hard. So it was who knew what was going to happen? I'm just delighted to be here.
Is it easier or harder to be going up against one person as opposed to 8 others?
This is my first time running for a citywide office, and I'm just going with the flow, Dan. I'm finding it to be compelling and challenging in both situations. And it's by far the longest job interview I've ever had. And the whole city is making their opinion known. And I'm excited to be in this moment in time. I think we have two distinct candidates with two distinct perspectives and styles. And, I think it's really good for Portland.
Well, if you end up in public office, it's a nonstop job interview. It never ends, even once you get the job. So I find
I'm gonna serve like I'm not really obsessed with that. I'm gonna serve one day at a time to do what's right for the people that live in the city and not worry about the polls and worry about the next election.
Let's talk about your first time around. One of the big issues that you ran on, and it was one that is routinely one of the biggest issues to people in Portland, which is homelessness and the housing crisis. We're going to touch on that in just a second because I'm sure your focus has been drawn to some other things as of late. How would you summarize what the country and this city is going through right now?
Well, the Black Lives Matter movement is obviously on front and center of everyone's mind, and this uprising has been exciting because there's so many people that for whatever reason, it took this incident and this uprising to finally wake up and see that we truly need police reform. We truly need a community safety system. And so we get to reimagine that in Portland, and we get to take inspiration from some other communities across the country that have actually been doing this, like Camden, New Jersey, and Newark, New Jersey, and also in Flint, Michigan. And so I'm excited to be that person that comes from the community I've always tested innovation. I know that the real innovation in City Hall doesn't lie inside that building. It's out in our neighborhoods. And so engaging with the community street response and other organizations to have them be a part of this new system we're building is exciting. I also think that since I started in the primary, obviously COVID-19 was the big showstopper. I mean, there was life before COVID-19, and now there's life afterwards. And we're just starting to feel that economic devastation that's coming with this public health crisis. And for me, the big crises prior to all of this was homelessness and housing. And that's only bigger now than it was before then. And it was a crisis before, and it's just becoming more of a paramount issue.
How do you prioritize the crises? You just outlined 3 major, impactful, life-changing, life-altering things that are happening in our society today. How do you prioritize your time or your efforts to tackle any of them properly?
Well, the key is, Dan, is to prioritize them and have those 3 be our big priorities and have the entire city council focus on them. So I've been also running on a system change agenda about the charter review. And so I've been saying from moment one that we can't continue to be in this archaic form of government where we have all these mini mayors overseeing bureaus. And I'm not going to be caught in the weeds of some little bureau. I'm going to act on day one as if we already are a high functioning team of 5 that's focused on those 3 priorities. And so for me, There's no time like this crisis to put as an opportunity to finally do something that anyone that's been tuning in for a while knows that Portland's about a century behind on implementing the system change.
Feels like a lot to bite off, though, doesn't it? Because you have these three major crises, and of course, COVID is brand new to anything we've ever dealt with. Of course, police reform has been, ongoing, depending on how you look at it, for decades. And houselessness and the homeless population is something that multiple generations of people in leadership have tried to tackle. But now we have COVID, so you have two of the most systemic issues in our country, a brand new pandemic, and you want to change the system of government while dealing with all three of those things?
Yeah, I'm smiling for a reason. One of my biggest hesitations to ever run for public office is that the government sector moves so slow, and we're entrenched with the special interests that keep us stuck in the status quo. And so for me, and anyone that knows me and has followed my career, they know that I mean it when I say, like, there's nothing like a crisis for an opportunity. So I just see all of this as finally a chance to take care of things and reimagine, our government, as everyone is using that word for a reason. And so all the things that we were visioning before COVID, they're not really relevant anymore. And so we have to really take a pause right now, figure out how to survive, figure out how to change the form of government, focus in these priorities. The revenue streams are going to come way down. So we're going to be forced to be efficient and streamlined like never before. We have to look at where we have mergers and streamline opportunities with the county. We have to definitely look at how we can do that within City Hall. I mean, all you heard for the last decade is that trying to go from getting the money from, say, the government, whether it's the state or the federal government that lands in Portland, takes 2 to 3 years longer to break dirt and build something in the city compared to all of the municipalities that surround us. Nothing's changed. So now Portland really has to get humble and realize that this city hasn't been working. We have a $5.6 billion budget that has been poorly run for some time. So let somebody in from the outside that's actually has experience in innovating and creating, and let them be on the team, and let's figure this out.
As you're on the outside looking in, how do you feel our leaders right now have been handling what we've been experiencing here as a city in the past few months?
That's a good question. I think with COVID-19, I thought the city especially the city and the county put pressure on the governor, and that we probably had a swifter response than most. Having survived a pandemic myself, being HIV since the early 80s, I know adult behavior change in any public health crisis is not easy. And I think the independent spirit of our country makes it clearly more challenging. And so I also am aware that our state has the fewest amount of hospital beds, ICU units per 1,000 than any state in the country. So we have to take this seriously. And I think that we did. I think the fact that we have new guidelines today that talk about wearing masks outside and inside both, we got to take this seriously. And adult behavior change in a public health crisis is a big deal. The leader's responsibility is to take that complexity of science and break it down and digest it properly, and so everyone can understand it. And so I think we've done a decent job with that. I think we're in a little bit of denial, Dan, about how severe this economic devastation is. My friends who own small businesses, whether it's restaurants, whether it's in the music venue, you realize that in the music venues alone, the music stopped on mid-March, right? By the end of March, we had $5 million in loss just in music venues alone. In 1 month's time, $8 million. Those industries are such a big part of our robust economy. Our food culture is a big part of our economy. That's what's attracted people to Portland, actually, is that creativity and that zest for life. And when all of that shut down, we're in a tough place. So we're going to have to really figure out during this choreography of distancing until we have a vaccine, until we can really lower the curve. We're going to have to really figure out how to take care of each other. And we're going to have to do that with much lower currency and much smaller budgets.
Yeah, Dan, I've been reading a lot about that because I feel the same way as you do. I don't know that it's being properly reported how damaging this economic situation is going to be moving forward, or even how damaging it can be to give such a massive bailout to an entire population. And I can't really find that reporting because I believe maybe it's too early to tell how things are going to shake out. Do you believe that to be the case? And how do you see this working for us down the line? And what should our leaders be focused on?
Yeah, I've always been on the revenue generating side of the independent sector. So I've always been in touch with the private sector And I've always noticed in my career where they feel the burdens of any economic decline, whether it was a Great Recession or this. But I think people aren't realizing how big this is, and this is much larger than what we experienced in 2008. This was like the spigot being turned off suddenly, and so the public government tends to have lagging indicators, if you will. So the revenues come a little bit later, just like when we're turning it back on, the revenues come back a little bit later. So the government's always behind. So I'm hearing a little bit too much of the same old solutions. We've never been here before. And I think sometimes it's hard to admit that. But, I wasn't alive during the Great Recession. I wish my dad still was so I could ask him a few questions. But I'm not Great Recession, the Great Depression. And when you combine that with maybe the pandemic of 1919 with the flu, it's like you have to couple those things together to maybe get any sense of what this might be like. And none of us really have that life experience. So it's time for us to just admit that and really start to be kind to one another, be creative, think out of the box, figure out how public-private can actually work together in creative ways like never before. But every time in the city, in any city, when you really move something forward that's mind-blowing and monumental and exciting, it's always been a combination of the community and government, the private sector and government. It's always a multi-sector approach. And I think we've been in too many echo chambers over the last 10 years where we haven't been really listening and connecting with one another to come up with those kind of creative solutions. So again, I see this as an opportunity to build Portland forward because it's certainly not going to be the same as it was before the pandemic.
I'm trying to share your optimism, Dan. I really am. I like the smile. I think it's working, but we'll see. I'm a little bit more pessimistic than you are, I think, right now. But let's talk about
that's why you're in that profession. Yeah,
you're probably right. You're probably right. Let's talk about police for just a second. What do you think about what do you think about defunding the police?
I think the term I like to say is I want to repurpose the public's investment for our community safety. I think that we've had too much investment just in one aspect of it that has proven to be a culture that has too much of a military type force to it. I've been in protests myself where I feel like I'm a pretty peaceful, optimistic person and I'm there for the right reasons, and then suddenly the armored gear comes out and it really triggers you, and next thing you know, it makes you agitated. So we've been experiencing that for some time. The fact is it's just not working anymore. We've now finally had an uprising where people are believing what people from marginalized communities, especially African-American people, have been talking about for decades. And, we can't go back now. There's finally a critical mass of attitudes, of beliefs, and values that are clear that the culture of our police department has to radically change. And so, but we can't do that just by focusing on them. We have to build and reimagine a community safety system. So I like the repurposing of $15 million from the police department into community solutions like Portland Street Response, where we have more people on the streets that are actually trauma informed and have de-escalation skills. That's what we've been asking for a long time. So they become partners in this work together.
How about the way that the riots are being handled? I think they're whatever opinion you have on this is kind of a rock and a hard place one. But there seem to be riots that continue, or at least protests that turn violent into each night. There have been situations where police say they're being attacked and have damage to back that up. And then there was just a situation, I believe, Sunday night or going into Sunday morning where a person was shot in the head with a less than lethal round, and it's unclear if they're going to survive. How do you feel about the way police have handled this?
Well, let's kind of break it down into some different areas here. So, first of all, the young man, Donovan is his first name. Let's just hold him in our heart and that he's doing well in the hospital right now. And what happened on late Saturday night, early Sunday morning, was instigated by the federal government's response to help out cities like Portland. Not that we asked for it, and at a time when we want the federal government to lean in and help us out with COVID-19 protocols and COVID-19 economic disaster relief. Instead, we got military force from the federal government. So there's that. I do believe that Portlanders are very upset about what occurred, thank goodness, and we don't want to tolerate that in the City of Roses. I think that the protesters, it's complex. The vast majority are there for this uprising. They're staying on message. It's peaceful. It's attracted mass populations, and then it appears there's other groups that come in that I think the media has to do a better job of distinguishing between the nuance of these different groups. And there's some that operate with a different agenda late into the night. And yet at the same time, there's a real disconnect between generations on what is happening right now. So my style would be, I like throwing people in the same room with different perspectives, but I believe we could get enough people in critical mass and leadership, whether they're from the protesting contingent, the police, the business community, to say that we want to move forward as a city, and we want to have a downtown that actually attracts people for things that make us want to live here. And one things that make us want to live here is a robust, joyful economy at times. And that doesn't discredit the fact that we can all be on the same page about how police brutality must never be tolerated ever again, and that the reforms must continue to go forward. That work is very methodical, Dan. It's not going to go away just because everyone put up a sign or everyone protested. That's going to be chipped away because city council members are going to have the audacity to be bold and clear that the culture must change at the police department. And then we have to look at labor union contracts and get into the details of that. So I think that all of this can happen, but we've got to have tough, uncomfortable conversations that include different points of view at the table. And we have to then measure our goals on what we want and be in this together.
Is there a certain level of intimidation that people like you probably, I would imagine, feel on a certain level at this point? You know, you begin to run and you have your passions, and you have a very captivating is the way I would put it, but I know it's a very a backstory of struggle and of difficulty in your life that I found very compelling and interesting, especially in terms with your the compassion you feel for the houseless community. So I completely can kind of get there with you on your passion to run and to be in this realm. But then suddenly the world has gotten very, very complex, and there are very, very difficult questions to try and sort out here right now. Is there a certain level of intimidation there running for a seat during all of this?
You know, first of all, I'm the youngest of 8. I have 6 older brothers. So if I was intimidated, I wouldn't have survived childhood. You know, I've always been able to take a punch and get back up. And so I'm comfortable with the intentions, with the intensity of this moment. And I also think that because of all this chaos, because of all this crises that we're dealing with, again, there's going to be a willingness to actually roll the dice and try something new. And that makes me excited. I do believe it's the right time and the right place for someone with my career background and also my life story. You know, I came home to die in 1995 because I was told I had 6 months to live. And so I got home, and then science caught up with me, and the HIV drugs improved. And next thing you know, the same doctor that told me to make plans for my demise was saying, oh, you're going to have to go suit up and go work again. So I've been living on some wonderful borrowed time for 25 years. I feel great. So yes, I am an optimist, and I've always taken on challenges. It is personal for me because my third oldest brother, Tim, died on our streets 6 years ago. And he had mental health issues, stopped taking his meds, started over abusing with recreational substance abuse drugs, and that happened. But what was frustrating is there really wasn't a system set up for someone like him. And it wasn't like a house for him was going to be helpful. We tried to house him, but getting the fix every day of drugs was what mattered. So we really have to look at this houselessness crisis with more dimensions. There's that population. There's the essential workers, which I think people are finally starting to give some respect towards as they're allowing us to have the privilege to survive during this pandemic, why they risk their lives for us. They can't even afford to live in Portland. What's the long-term affordable housing for that population? Then there's the population that's just on the brink of being homeless because they're just making enough to maybe cover rent, but one layoff, one furlough away from being on the streets. What's that population's strategy? So we have to break it down into these three and not just say a home for everyone. And then the people at the table, Dan, it has to be different. It can't just be those that are receiving the contracts, the elected officials that want attention for getting the money, and then those bureaucrats that serve them. that is like a kiss the ring type meeting. We need people at the table that have survived on the streets, that have critical reviews of what they experienced. We need people in the business community that are suffering from the consequences of this on our streets. Why my friends say they, even before the pandemic, had less people coming to their restaurants. People in the arts community saying less people were coming to the theater because of this. So they deserve to be at the table too. Portland's got to stop being nice and actually have those tough, tension-filled dialogues, and then get on the same page about what our North Star is, not get hung up on our differences on style, but crunch that together and have the tension and figure out how to measure impact. And then be transparent. I mean, how many more measures are we going to pass where the voters are generous in Portland? I'm one of them, but I would like to know what happens with the money. It would be nice to see every time we pass a housing measure in 1 year's time, how many units were actually produced. When we pass a transportation measure, what happened with that money? I'd like to see it. I see the same potholes on the little side streets in North Portland for the last 2 decades. They're still there. So, we need some accountability. And I think this economic crisis is going to raise the level of that, which is important.
I've heard the 6 older brother thing before, but I don't feel bad for you, man. I feel bad for your sister, okay? Because she had 7 brothers, which is worse than having 6 brothers, okay? So.
Touche. Yeah. And she's the reason I moved home, because I thought she'd be the only one that could put up with me as I was a patient. Yeah.
Nice. Hey, what do you think?
She deserved love.
What do you think about Wapato?
Well, first of all, it's called Bybee Lakes Treatment Center. And I think that the Bybee Lakes Treatment Center has a lot of promise. And when they went out and raised a lot of money from the community, when they were able to find a leader who actually experienced houselessness and homelessness and all of the challenges of mental health and substance abuse and is in recovery, to be one of the inspirational leaders, I'm going to lean in and listen to that. I would like to see how they're going to repurpose that facility that we all paid for, so that it could be a place where people like my brother Tim could maybe have a shot at getting back on their feet and slowly, methodically being a part of society again.
I like the correction. It is Bybee Lakes. You are correct. Why did you correct me so quickly there? Are you just, does Wapato, that name, it's the stigma, need to be just put in our rearview mirror at this point?
You answered your own question.
Yeah, I picked up the nuance of your. I could hear it in the tone of your voice.
Yeah.
So how do you adjust for the next? Because the election's coming up quickly. I think a lot of people have this misconception it's in November, but so it's coming up pretty quickly. What do you do between now and then to, aside from doing interviews with people like me, to get your voice heard? Because I know it's your first time around, but what an interesting way to run for something. It's probably never how you envisioned it in your mind if you ever considered this in the past.
Yeah. You just show up for venues like this. You continue to we have a lot of Zoom hours for Dan, and we're building a grassroots campaign. We definitely have a lot of people that have given to this effort, and they want to see their money spent wisely. So we'll make sure we target those voters and get the information to them, because I think informed voters are going to give the person that's outside of the status quo a shot at a time when we need innovation and creativity at City Hall.
Got it. Dan Ryan, thank you so much. I appreciate you giving us some extended time